Happy spring. March Madness is in full swing with Maryland in the Sweet 16. Cherry blossoms are near full bloom, and the weather is at that tipping point. Can you believe it? We're 5 years removed from those early days of the pandemic. Now, as opposed to those early days of the lockdown, DC is coming out of hibernation. In a typical year, this is when we begin to see the activity pick up. But much like 2020, this is not expected to be a typical year. Of course, there is, however, a level of uncertainty fueled by the federal government that echoes throughout the DMV. Now, there is so much that we could be discussing today. I'm going to try to keep it as short a period as possible and cover as much as I possibly can. And I'm happy to continue this conversation offline, and I'm sharing out my meeting link so that you can book a time for a call. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat, and we'll circle back and discuss them at the end. My agenda for today is to talk about the new administration's policies, the impact they may have on the local real estate market, and DC as a whole. We're going to talk about the federal workforce shift, the small housing providers and their survival guide for being prepared for what may come ahead, secrets to keeping good tenants in place, and how professional property management can help. Now, DC has been labeled as recession-proof with the federal government as a backing. Now I'm reading a lot of recession-resistant. And recently, a few days ago, the DC chief financial advisor said that, or financial officer said that the city is expected to enter a mild recession in the next fiscal year before economic conditions improve again. So while the back-in-office mandate had certainly imposed challenges to the many that had the convenience of working from home and accustomed to the flexibility that allowed, the commute are longer for those that managed to move to more space and outside the area, but the restaurants downtown certainly missed them. I've been out, I've seen the people that are out and about, and with the additional traffic, we're beginning to see a lot of change in the market as we typically would in the spring. So we remain optimistic that the population is going to continue to rise, as so many metro cities across the U.S. are seeing growth, though it wouldn't be likely the same growth we saw from 2010 to 2020. Now, we all know that DC has been a transient city and always impacted to a degree by the seasonality of the market. We expect modest projections in the next few months, but that will tell a lot. We will see that the more established neighborhoods continue to do well, though other areas of the city have been facing some challenges. Now, I'm a founding member of the DC National Association of Residential Property Managers. I'm heavily involved in the DC Association of Realtors, especially on the Public Policy Committee, and always helping to track and mold as much of this legislation as possible. The Trump administration has implemented several policies that are influencing the DC real estate market, both sales and rentals. Now, we all know that there's a reduction in the federal workforce. We are aware of their intentions to relocate some federal agencies while they intend to keep others. The return to the office mandates that I talked about previously are working their way through, and we are seeing more and more people coming into the city on a daily basis. There is going to be a reduction of the government's real estate holdings, which could change neighborhoods. Just imagine walking out of an apartment and being able to go into the National Air and Space Museum, for example. That whole section between 395 and Southwest Waterfront, south of the mall, could potentially be restructured. Now, we know that there's also going to be impacts on tariffs and the immigration policies, especially on construction. So these are things we're mindful of. And there has been a pretty big impact and influence on the luxury housing markets citywide. So in summary, the Trump administration policies are reshaping DC's real estate landscape, and it's going to introduce both challenges and opportunities across different market segments. Now, last week's emergency legislation should have restored DC's $1.1 billion budget shortfall, but this morning I also read that the FHFA director reversed Biden's administration's Renters Bill of Rights. Though you should be familiar with our own Office of Tenant Advocates Bill of Rights, and we've been required to include in all leases for the last several years. More locally, our mayor and council members have been working to implement rebalancing expectations for neighborhoods, tenants, and landlords, which is the Mayor's Rental Act. Major takeaways from that are going to be related to the reform of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, also referred to as ERAP. Now, other members of the council have added additional amendments to that act, but ultimately this should reduce the number of stays tenants can get after applying for the program. We've also provided feedback to Councilmember Fruman's office to allow for more transparency and tracking capacity throughout the process, because that has been a challenge for those that have applied. There is efforts to strengthen tenant safety protections. In other words, authorizing evictions for residents or neighbors that have been arrested or convicted with violent offenses. There is effort to make a better, more streamlined court process timelines, notably reversing what had been implemented during the pandemic to return to post-pandemic expectations, which is far from being ideal for anyone that does find themselves in that situation. But at least this does reduce the expectations and potentially get those court dates sooner than we have been experiencing the last 5 years. There are conversations about modernizing TOPA yet again to make sure that we avoid displacement and ensure additional affordable housing remains intact for the city. Councilmember Fruman again is proposing additional rent stabilization protection amendments that would make voucher residents only allow for rent increases that are within rent control guidelines, which is not something that we've had in the past. Typically, those units are exempted from those rent control limitations. And Pinto and Louis George have legislation out there for making sure that we are a lead-free city by 2030, making sure that all of the service lines to all residents and all properties have been reduced. Now, we all recognize that the federal workforce is getting hit hard. Roughly 20% of the federal workforce lives in the DMV. Now, DC alone is home to about 7.1% of that workforce, which is an alarming 147,000 employees. There is, however, going to be a rippling effect upon those that are dependent upon the government funding. Several nonprofits and secondary industries could potentially have impact. Every day we're seeing new articles coming about that are talking about adjustments and downsizing of different groups, and it is going to have an impact. Now, you, as the small housing provider, have a great role in this. We want to pivot. We want to make sure that the rentals stay in high demand, and there are still people coming to this city. Okay. There will be those that have been on the cusp moved to Baltimore that are beginning to look back into the district. In fact, one of the big migrations that we do look at are residents, tenants that are living in New York, Boston, and Baltimore that have begun to look back in the district. Atlanta is another big contributor that could be moving back into our city. So what can you do as a small housing provider? I have had plenty of owners reach out to us over the years that have found themselves in a pickle one way or another, because as much as you want to plan for the best and hope for the best, you really have to start planning for the worst and potentially hope for the best. Many of you that are tuning in today are playing a significant role in providing affordable housing citywide. We all know that tenants will not stay forever, but you have a great opportunity to provide housing and maintain a vibrant city that DC is and will continue to be. I do want you to prepare for the worst while you are hoping for the best. I will say that a couple of times, because by doing that, you'll be much better prepared to navigate any challenges, if any, that may lie ahead. Be licensed. Communicate. Know your options and offer advice. If a resident is falling on hard times, there are programs out there that can assist. Don't take shortcuts. You certainly want to make sure that you cross your T's and dot your I's, but also have advanced conversations. And when we do have residents that do have to go and it makes sense for them to leave, work with them as best you can, because ultimately going down the path with the attorneys and the court process is going to be a lot more overwhelming for many than it is worth the fight. Finding a new resident for most neighborhoods is going to be very productive. And so if a person is just unable to make ends meet, it's best to have that open dialogue to figure out how to work with them on it. But it does not hurt to have an attorney on the backup. Though I have found that so many are backlogged, they can't take on new clients, or they're going to ask for huge retainers. So as professional property managers, we're committed to effectively maintaining your property and the relationship with your tenants. We are prepared to enforce the terms of the lease, and we have attorneys to assist when matters escalate, with the intention of them never escalating. So how do we do it? We want to keep them happy. All right. Residents today have an evolving expectation from their landlords, largely shaped by technology, changing lifestyles, and of course, market conditions. Here are a few things that they commonly want. Prompt and professional communication. Quickly respond to their maintenance requests and their inquiries. Be proactive on the communication about rent increases and any updates. Have and maintain multiple channels of contact. Be able to text, email, pick up the phone, especially. We utilize a tenant portal that is very transparent and gives real-time updates. But be responsive and respectful. Okay? They really want that. They're going to need that fast and reliable maintenance. So swift response times for repairs, especially for essential services like plumbing, HVAC, security concerns, you need to have that backlog of contractors that are able to work with you on it and get out timely. And being able to provide some transparent tracking of that service request, like that online portal that we have in place, is essential these days. But remain professional, remain courteous, and make sure that those that you're sending in are doing the same. As far as pricing, be fair and predictable. You know, there are reasonable expectations for rent increases, and with ample notice, it opens the dialogue. You want to have transparent fee structures. You want to be able to make sure that you have flexible payment options. Credit card, paying online, setting up auto pay, just multiple methods of payment to ensure that they're able to get it in, presuming that they are in the capacity to do this. And when you are talking about rent increases, you want to offer stability, but also expect flexibility when presenting these lease options. Many times we're going through this, especially this time of the year, because so many residents are on that spring summer cycle. You're going to want to maintain that proper notice, effectively communicating, giving that annual extension if they're looking for stability, but give that month-to-month option as we're required to do in the district, so that they have that if they need the flexibility. But even consider a hybrid. We had a couple of residents this past month that wanted to try to do like a 6-month lease or even a 3-month lease just to get into the summer. One of these things is worth discussing with your tenants, as is the discussion about whether or not there will be a pet-friendly policy. So many residents have acquired pets over the last few years. If that's going to be a determination of whether they stay or go, and the building or you don't have a preference either way, certainly offer it. But you have to have a protocol in place to be able to assist with the transferring the lease, as opposed to subletting. You always want to make sure that you know who's living in your property. And DC had in the past year made adjustments to what that allowance is and what you can charge for it. But in the end of the day, you have a responsibility to mitigate their financial responsibilities. Tenants do want to have quiet enjoyment. You want to respect their privacy. Give proper notice before inspections or maintenance visits. DC does expect now, as opposed to years past where you had to give reasonable notice for a reasonable purpose, There are expected timelines now. You have to give 48 hours notice of your intention to enter a property. You can't just go in without providing that notice. And you want to enforce noise policies for all residents. Quiet enjoyment is not only within their space, but the noise and the smells and that are impacting them as well. So if you have neighbors that are becoming a challenge, it's important for you to be involved in that communication so that your tenant doesn't feel as if they're left standing alone in the conversation. Okay. Always monitor safety and security, as those things are a big factor these days as well. So my name is Conrad Bennett. I'm with EJF Rentals. I've been a key member of the team for quite a long time, and I've seen many cycles evolve throughout this process and the life cycles of the residents. So I would like to open up the conversation for any questions that anybody may have, and we can dig into that a little bit now.
All right, we have a question from Joyce. Joyce says, curious if EJF is considering lowering the fees or open to that discussion during these times, especially if renters break the lease, lost job, and a new renter is needed.
Well, DC has restricted what you would charge to change residents. And so we've certainly been working with that to make sure that we are helping to secure new residents, generally working with the current and outgoing tenants to make sure that that is a smooth process as possible. And the fees that we charge are minimal at this point, generally not much beyond the application fees.
All right, we got another question from Karen. Is there any changes on squatters and their rights?
I had the conversation with somebody the other day about squatters and proposed legislation that anybody that squatters should potentially be removed through a police call to the police, as opposed to them being able to establish tenancy. But that is certainly a conversation that will continue to be had if there are ongoing vacancies throughout the city. It does seem as if it makes it a good opportunity for those that wish to find housing for free. But as of right now, squatters don't have, there is still a lot of work to be able to get somebody out. So make sure that the property is and remains secure for the duration.
All right, that's all the questions I'm seeing for right now. So, one more question. What happens when a family takes over a family member's property and doesn't, Karen, would you mind finish, and doesn't pay rent?
When a family member takes over a family property
And doesn't pay rent. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I do recall that Chairman Mendelson is working on some proposed legislation that's going to talk about Vacant to Vibrant Amendment Act, which does start to address some of these properties that are tangled up in title after somebody dies. It would establish a few opportunities for them to be able to get it back online, but I don't believe that will potentially, at this stage, address what would happen if somebody were to take occupancy of that while all of that has been going on. It does appear as if that legislation was recently introduced and probably won't be up for markup for a little while. So I'm going to make a note about adding that in to make sure that they consider that as an option.
Okay. Yeah, she followed up and said that the family member died and took over the unit. So that was the situation.
So a family member died and another member of the family just took over the space, whether or not they were rightfully allowed to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, we have, and she followed up and they didn't pay. So,
Yeah.
So moving on. Sorry.
That'll make Thanksgiving dinner pretty awkward.
Yeah. The next question from Mana. Can you elaborate on the quiet enjoyment when the noise is coming from a neighbor? My group home is next to a neighbor who plays reggae music sometimes 7 days a week in the backyard for up to 6 hours in a row, 8 months in the year. Tenants can't enjoy their backyard or even leave windows open. I tried speaking to a member of the household next door, but the head of the household later became hostile with me. What are our rights?
Have you called the police? Um, I know that there's going to be certain times where they can interact. I know that there's an expectation that before I think it's 7 a.m. or after 10 p.m., those quiet hours need to be administered or adhered to. And that could potentially make for a challenge during the day, but it doesn't seem as if it's a one-off. It seems to be a repeat occurrence. Whether or not that resident is a tenant or an owner might change the path for your potential recourse. But it may be worth consulting an attorney to see what opportunities they have to at least give them some form of notice that it is having an impact on your capacity to the um, enjoy your property. Um, I do recognize that you can't pick your neighbors, and it sounds as if you've already exhausted your capacity to talk to them about potentially tampering it down a bit.
Yeah,
Is
she
this?
did a quick follow up.
Yeah,
She's never called the police. The neighbors own the house. Music ends before 8 p.m.
yeah. I certainly would expect that having some form of a paper trail would help with any potential conversations, and so it might. If not consulting an attorney to see what your options are, it may be worth discussing it with the police to see how they would handle such a situation because you can't be the first that has had this struggle.
All right, that's all the questions I see.
And
One more. Okay. um, do you handle TOPA process for 5+ units under your management? That's TOPA.
Yep, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, which is also some legislation that is going to be revisited through the Mayor's Rental Act. There are conversations about what that should or could look like. For those who aren't aware, the TOPA regulations have changed for the single family. Um, uh, 1 units, 2 to 4 is handled a little differently, and 5+ is a different conversation. But that is beginning to become part of the conversation. And yes, the agents involved with the sale, I've certainly administered the paperwork for many that I've been working with. That it can be a little involved, and the timelines need to be adhered to. So I would be closely monitoring what the mayor's legislation may do to change that potentially for the better for an owner. But yes, we've certainly done that as part of our sales listing process for owners, regardless of what that might look like. And you need to make sure that you are aware of what those timelines are so that you can plan appropriately. And to that regard, we also have worked with owners that are selling their properties because you do want to make sure that you have nice, clean books. Be able to let owners, potential buyers, know what the expenses are, and be able to give sort of a pro forma for them to be able to know what they're going to be potentially getting into.
Great, great. Any more questions? Anybody? I don't see any more coming through.
So the next several months, several weeks, months will probably be a pretty good eye-opening experience for what is to be coming. There is going to be an ongoing expectation that the city will shift and evolve as it would otherwise. But for those listening in, I do want to say that we are constantly having conversations about that level of uncertainty that we experienced less than 5 years ago at the beginning stages of the pandemic. So there will be a lot of people that may sit on the sidelines. And so when you do have good tenants in place, I do want to stress that it's prudent to work with them and make sure that they're set up for success with you for years to come, because I do anticipate with all of the turmoil and conversations and potential frustration with the economy and the job market, housing is a very essential aspect and very stressful for those that are around it. So be mindful of that as you are having these conversations with your residents. Well, thank you all for joining, and I look forward to hearing from you if you have an opportunity to click some time with me. And always happy to continue a conversation and look forward to next month's presentation.